Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. The little signs were there all along, but when you're a mother, you tend to make excuses for your children. My name is Margaret Thornton, Maggie to those who care enough to use my nickname. And at 64, I thought I knew my family. I thought wrong. It had been 2 years since Harold passed. 2 years of learning to sleep alone in our bed. 2 years of talking to his photograph on the mantel. 2 years of figuring out who Margaret Thornton was without Harold beside her. My husband of 42 years had always been the family glue. When he died of a sudden heart attack just after our anniversary, something in our family died with him. This was going to be our first real Christmas gathering since we lost him. The previous year had been a scattered affair. Rebecca and her husband James took their kids to his parents in Connecticut. My son Daniel and his wife Emma went on a Caribbean cruise to escape the sadness, they said, and Thomas, my youngest, sent a text message on Christmas Eve saying he couldn't make the drive from Chicago because of work. I spent that Christmas alone with my sister Jean, who pitied me enough to cancel her own plans, but this year would be different. I was determined to bring everyone together again, to revive our family traditions, to feel like a family again. Harold would have wanted that. I spent 3 weeks planning every detail. So the menu was classic Thornton Christmas, Harold's famous roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, my herb-roasted potatoes, cranberry sauce made from scratch just like my mother taught me, and Harold's secret recipe for Christmas pudding that took days to prepare. We had made these dishes together for decades, and I was determined to honor his memory by doing it all perfectly, even if it meant doing it alone. The house took even longer to decorate. I pulled out all the family ornaments from the attic, each with its own story. The clay star Daniel made in 2nd grade, the angel Rebecca painted in high school, the wooden train set Thomas used to arrange under the tree, Harold's collection of Santa figurines that he'd been building since our first Christmas together. I polished the good silver that had been my grandmother's. I ironed the holiday tablecloth with the embroidered holly leaves. I set out the Christmas china that Harold and I had saved for years to buy. "This will be beautiful," I told Harold's photograph as I adjusted a wreath. "Everyone will be so happy to be together again." The day before Christmas, my hands were cracked from all the cleaning and cooking. My back ached from standing at the counter for hours. But looking at the dining room table, perfectly set and waiting for tomorrow, filled me with pride. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. They would see how much I loved them. They would understand that even without Harold, we were still a family. That night I found myself unable to sleep, to excitement perhaps, or maybe just the arthritis in my hip acting up again. I went to the kitchen for some tea, and as I waited for the kettle, I opened the junk drawer where we kept odds and ends. It was habit, really. Harold used to tease me about my drawer archaeology, as he called it, my tendency to rummage through drawers when I couldn't sleep. That's when my fingers brushed against a sealed envelope I hadn't noticed before. The paper was cream-colored and thick, Harold's preferred stationery for important matters. On the front, in his neat, precise handwriting, "For Maggie when you need it most." I nearly dropped my teacup. Harold's handwriting. A message from beyond, it seemed. I traced my fingers over the letters, feeling suddenly as if he was standing right beside me. But I didn't open it. Something told me this wasn't the moment Harold had intended. I returned it to the drawer, deciding to trust his judgment even now. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, blanketing our front yard in pristine white. I was up before sunrise, making final preparations. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasting meat. I put on my best dress, a deep burgundy velvet I'd saved for special occasions, and even took extra time with my makeup and hair. I wanted to look nice. I wanted them to see that I was doing well, that I was still very much alive. Rebecca and James arrived first, with their teenage twins in tow. The boys barely looked up from their phones to mumble hello. Rebecca hugged me briefly, then immediately began rearranging the appetizers I'd set out. "Mom, you've put out way too much food. Nobody eats these old-fashioned canapes anymore," she said, sighing as if my choices personally exhausted her. James gave me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, then headed straight for the bar cart. "Got any decent scotch, Maggie?" "The good stuff Harold used to keep?" he asked, already rifling through the bottles. Daniel and Emma arrived 20 minutes later. Emma immediately began complaining about the parking on our street and how her new boots might be ruined by the snow. Daniel gave me a quick hug, then joined James at the bar. Thomas showed up last, almost an hour late, with a girlfriend I'd never met before. He didn't bother introducing her to me until Rebecca pointedly cleared her throat. "Oh, right," Thomas said. "Mum, this is Caitlin, my mother. Caitlin gave me a tight smile and immediately asked where she could charge her phone. As everyone settled into the living room, I couldn't help but notice how they all seemed to avoid looking at Harold's empty chair. It was as if by not acknowledging it, they could pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. "Dinner's ready," I announced after a while, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. They filed into the dining room, and for one brief moment as they took in the beautifully set table, the glow of candles, the feast laid out before them, I thought I saw appreciation in their eyes. But then, "Mom, are these the same dishes we've been eating every Christmas since I was 5? Rebecca asked, poking at the roast beef with her fork. "Some traditions are worth keeping," I said, trying to maintain my smile. "It's just a bit predictable, don't you think?" Daniel added. "Emma and I had this amazing fusion Christmas dinner on our cruise last year. Cranberry wasabi glazed salmon, quinoa stuffing. It was incredible." "Well, I thought we might all appreciate something familiar," I replied, feeling the first crack in my carefully constructed evening. That's when it happened, the moment that would change everything between us. "The problem is," James said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "this food is old and tired." "Just like—" He caught himself, but not quickly enough. "Just like what, James?" I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden hollow feeling in my chest. Rebecca jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "He doesn't mean anything, Mom. It's just that these recipes are from another era. Maybe it's time to try something new." "Yeah?" Thomas laughed, reaching for more wine. "This food is old and boring, just like the house." He looked around dramatically. "Just like everything here." Then Caitlin, who had been silent until now, giggled and said, "It's like vintage food, right? Old-fashioned and past its prime, like the lady of the house." The table went silent. Even Thomas looked uncomfortable at that, but no one, not one of my children, defended me. Rebecca cleared her throat and said in a low voice to James, but loud enough that I could hear, "Mom's getting up there. She doesn't have the energy for these big productions anymore. We really need to think about other arrangements for her soon." And just like that, as I sat at the head of the table where Harold should have been, looking at the children we had raised together, the grandchildren we had adored, I realized I had become invisible. Or worse, I had become a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, an old woman who didn't know when to step aside. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing up. "I need to check on the dessert." In the kitchen, my hands trembling, I opened the drawer and took out Harold's envelope. "I think this might be the moment you meant, my love," I whispered to him. I carefully opened it, my heart pounding. Inside was a letter and several official-looking documents. As I began to read, I felt Harold's presence stronger than I had in 2 years, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. "Would anyone like some Christmas pudding?" I called out, returning to the dining room with a smile that felt different now, stronger, knowing they had no idea what was coming. Idea what? When I walked back into the dining room, my smile must have puzzled them. The atmosphere was still tense from their comments, yet here I was, seemingly unruffled. I placed the Christmas pudding in the center of the table, Harold's recipe, the one he'd perfected over 30 years of Christmases. "Before we have dessert," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I have something I'd like to share with all of you." Rebecca rolled her eyes slightly. "Mum, can it wait? The kids are getting restless, and James has that early meeting tomorrow." "No," I said firmly, "it cannot wait." The tone of my voice must have surprised them. Even the twins looked up from their phones. I rarely spoke with such authority. That had been Harold's role. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who made excuses for everyone's behavior. Not tonight. I held up Harold's envelope. "Your father left this for me. The instructions were to open it when I needed it most." I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. "Tonight seems appropriate." "What is it?" Daniel asked, suddenly interested. I noticed how he straightened up, how his eyes narrowed slightly. Always the businessman, always calculating. "It's a letter," I said, "and some documents. I think I'll read the letter aloud, if you don't mind." No one objected, though I saw Rebecca and Daniel exchange a glance. I cleared my throat and began to read. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and something has happened to make you doubt your place in our family. I always hoped this letter would never be needed, but I've known our children longer than you have, my love. I helped raise them, after all. I've watched with growing concern how they've treated you these past few years. The cancelled visits, the unanswered phone calls, the way they listen with half an ear when you speak, the subtle suggestions that perhaps the house is too much for you now, that perhaps you should simplify your life. What they really mean is that you should simplify their lives by becoming less visible, less present, less of a reminder of their responsibilities. I've watched you make excuses for them. They're busy with their own families, you'd say. It's different for their generation, you'd explain. Your love for them has always been your greatest strength, Maggie, and sometimes your greatest blindness. I paused, looking up from the letter. The room was completely silent now. Even James had put down his drink. But I need you to see clearly now, my love, so I've done something that may surprise you. 2 months before my diagnosis, I made some changes to our financial arrangements and our will. The documents enclosed will explain everything in detail, but here's what you need to know. The house is entirely yours, not just for your lifetime, but to do with as you please. It is not, as the children believe, held in a family trust that they will inherit upon your passing. The money from my life insurance did not go entirely into the family trust as they assume. The majority of it is in a private account in your name only. The details are enclosed. Most importantly, the family business shares have been restructured. While the children believe they will automatically assume control when you step aside, the reality is more complex. You hold controlling interest, Maggie. You always have. I looked up again. Daniel's face had gone pale. As CFO of Thornton Manufacturing, he had been expecting to take full control soon. He'd been making decisions increasingly without consulting me, scheduling board meetings at times he knew I couldn't attend. I did this not to punish them, Maggie, but to protect you, and perhaps to give them one last lesson from their father. The lesson that family means nothing if there is no respect, no kindness at its core. Use this knowledge however you see fit. Keep it to yourself if you wish, share it if you must. But know this, you owe them nothing more than what you've already given, a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Remember the strong, fierce woman I fell in love with. She's still there, Maggie, she always has been. All my love forever, Harold. I carefully folded the letter and looked around at my children's faces. Shock, disbelief, and in Daniel's case, a quickly calculated re-evaluation. Dad must have written that when he was confused, Rebecca said finally, her voice gentle as if speaking to a child. You know how he got toward the end. Your father wasn't confused, I said calmly. He was perfectly lucid until the day he died, and these documents were drawn up months before his diagnosis. I tapped the stack of papers beside me. Everything is quite legal. I've had them verified by my own attorney. Your attorney? Thomas blurted out. Since when do you have your own attorney? I smiled slightly. There's a lot you don't know about me, it seems. Mom? Daniel leaned forward, his business face on now. Let's talk about this reasonably. Dad was just trying to protect you like he always did, but you don't need to worry about the technical details of the business or the estate. We can handle all of that for you. Like you've been handling the board meetings, and I asked, the ones scheduled during my physical therapy appointments? He had the grace to look embarrassed. Or perhaps you mean like you've been handling the vacation property in Maine, I continued, looking at Rebecca. The one you've been renting out on Airbnb and keeping the income from? Rebecca's face flushed red. How did you... Your father knew everything, I said simply, and now so do I. This is ridiculous, James cut in. You can't possibly understand the complexities of... Be quiet, James, I said, with such unexpected force that he actually obeyed. You live in a house that Harold and I helped you buy. Your sons attend private school because Harold and I paid the tuition. Your luxurious lifestyle exists because of our generosity. Perhaps you should remember that before commenting on how old and tired anything of mine is. The twins looked up from their phones, eyes wide. They'd never heard their grandmother speak this way. Emma nervously played with her napkin. Maggie, we didn't mean any harm. It's just that you've gotten comfortable, I finished for her. You've forgotten that respect isn't optional in a family. It's fundamental. I stood up slowly, gathering Harold's papers. I've spent 2 years grieving, not just for my husband, but for the family I thought we had built. I've watched you all drift away, too busy for Sunday calls, too important for regular visits except when you need something. I walked to the head of the table, where Harold's empty chair stood. I convinced myself it was normal, that all families drift apart, but Harold saw more clearly. He saw that you weren't just busy, you were waiting for me to become too old, too tired, too much trouble, waiting for your inheritance, waiting for me to disappear. Mom, that's not fair, Thomas protested weakly. Isn't it? I asked. Tell me, when was the last time any of you called just to see how I was doing, not to ask for money, not to check if I was managing okay in this big old house, but simply because you cared? The silence was answer enough. I thought so, I said quietly. I moved to the sideboard and pulled out a stack of envelopes, one for each of them. Inside these are copies of the relevant documents concerning each of you. Daniel, you'll find the new structure of the company board. Rebecca, there's information about the main property and the back taxes you owe on the rental income. Thomas, you'll find the details of the loan forgiveness program your father set up for your student debts, contingent on certain conditions that, I'm afraid to say, you haven't been meeting. I handed them out one by one. I'm not angry, I said, and it was true. The hurt was there, deep and real, but the anger had dissipated as I'd read Harold's letter. In its place was something clearer, stronger. I'm disappointed, and I'm reclaiming my place, in this family, in the business, in my own life. What does that mean exactly? Daniel asked, his voice carefully controlled. It means things will change, I replied simply. It means I will no longer be invisible. It means the assumptions you've all been making about your futures need to be reconsidered. I returned to my seat and picked up my dessert spoon. Now, would anyone like some Christmas pudding? Harold's recipe. Not too old-fashioned, I hope. The rest of the evening passed in a fog of stilted conversation and early departures. Rebecca and James left first, claiming the boys had school preparation the next day, though it was still Christmas break. Daniel and Emma followed quickly after, Daniel clutching his envelope with white knuckles. Thomas lingered, looking confused and a little lost. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. Mom, I'm sorry. About what I said. About not calling more. It was the only genuine moment of the evening. I touched his cheek gently. I know, Tommy. You always were the honest one. After everyone left, I sat alone in the quiet house, surrounded by the remnants of the dinner I had worked so hard to prepare. The partially eaten roast beef, the barely touched potatoes, the Christmas pudding served but largely ignored. I should have felt devastated. Instead, I felt strangely liberated. I went to the mantel and picked up Harold's photograph. You knew, didn't you? I said to his smiling face. You knew this day would come. I carried his picture to the kitchen and propped it up on the counter as I began to clean up. It was something we had always done together. Me washing, him drying, talking about the evening, laughing over family stories. Well, my love, I said as I filled the sink with soapy water, I think this is going to be an interesting year. As I washed each dish, each glass, each piece of silverware, I began to formulate a plan. Not for revenge. That wasn't what Harold had intended, and it wasn't what I wanted, but for restoration, for dignity, for a family rebuilt on something real if they were willing, and if they weren't. Well, I had options now. By the time I finished cleaning, it was past midnight. Christmas was over. A new day was beginning. And for the first time in 2 years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The days after Christmas passed in a curious silence. No calls, no texts, not even the usual perfunctory thanks for dinner messages that social etiquette demanded. I wasn't surprised. They were regrouping, reassessing, trying to figure out what this new version of their mother meant for their carefully laid plans. I used the quiet to my advantage. On December 27th, I called Walter Simmons, the family attorney who had helped Harold prepare his documents. Walter had been our friend for 30 years, joining us for dinner parties and fishing trips, watching our children grow up alongside his own. If anyone understood what Harold had intended with his final arrangements, it was Walter. Margaret, he greeted me warmly when I arrived at his office. I've been expecting your call. His office was comfortably old-fashioned, all dark wood and leather-bound books. It smelled of lemon polish and pipe tobacco, though Walter had given up smoking years ago. Some scents linger, becoming part of the very walls, rather like memories. Harold left very specific instructions, Walter said, settling behind his desk. He wanted me to be available to you whenever you decided to. How did he put it? Reclaim your kingdom. I had to smile at that. It was so very Harold, dramatic and a bit grandiose, but with a kernel of truth at the center. I'm not interested in kingdoms, Walter. Just respect. Sometimes they're the same thing, he replied sagely. Now I assume you've read through everything. Do you have questions? I did have questions, many of them. For the next 2 hours, Walter patiently walked me through the intricacies of Harold's arrangements. The house was indeed fully mine, with no encumbrances or conditions. The life insurance money had been divided, with a portion going to the family trust as the children believed, but the larger share, nearly 2/3, placed in accounts under my sole control. And then there was Thornton Manufacturing, the company Harold had built from a small machine shop into a respectable mid-sized business that employed over 200 people. The company that Daniel had been effectively running for the past few years, with increasingly less input from me. Harold restructured the shares, Walter explained, showing me a chart. While the children each received their 20% as they've always known, your 40% carries special voting rights. Essentially, you have control of the board. Daniel won't be happy about that, I murmured. Walter's expression turned serious. Margaret, Harold was concerned about Daniel's direction for the company. Some of his expansion plans, the leveraging of company assets for speculative ventures. Harold felt they were too aggressive, too risky. This wasn't entirely news to me. I had heard snippets of their arguments in Harold's final year, my husband advocating for steady growth and employee security, my son pushing for rapid expansion and higher profits. At the time, I had stayed out of it. Business had always been Harold's domain, and I was busy with my own concerns, my volunteer work at the hospital, my garden club, caring for Harold as his health declined. How easy it had been to compartmentalize our lives that way, how convenient for everyone, except now those neat compartments had been upended. What do you suggest I do? I asked Walter. He leaned back in his chair. That depends entirely on what you want, Margaret. Harold gave you options, not obligations. I considered this. I want my family back, I said finally. Not as it was. That clearly wasn't working. But something better, something real. Walter nodded. Then perhaps the best approach is directness. Call a family meeting. Lay out your expectations. See who rises to meet them. That evening I sent a text to our family group chat, a channel usually used for holiday coordination and occasional sharing of grandchildren's photos. Family meeting at the house, Sunday 2 p.m. Attendance is not optional. Mom. The responses came quickly. Daniel. Mom, I have plans. Can we reschedule? Rebecca. Is everything okay? Should we be worried? Thomas. I'll be there. I replied simply, Sunday 2 p.m. This is important. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. For the first time in years, I slept without my usual sleep aid. I had decisions to make and I needed a clear head. The next morning I woke with purpose. First I called Jean, my sister. You did what? She exclaimed when I told her about Christmas dinner. Maggie, I didn't think you had it in you. Neither did they, I said dryly. Neither did I, for that matter. So what's your plan now? She asked. That's partially why I'm calling. I need your help. By Sunday, everything was prepared. Not an elaborate meal this time. I had learned that lesson. Just coffee and the cinnamon rolls that had been a weekend tradition when the children were young. The dining room table was cleared of holiday decorations, replaced with folders and documents neatly arranged at each place. They arrived cautiously, each at a different time despite the clear instructions. Rebecca came first 20 minutes early, clearly hoping to get a private word with me before the others arrived. Mom, she began as soon as I opened the door, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We'll discuss everything when everyone is here, I said firmly, taking her coat. Coffee's in the living room. Daniel arrived precisely at 2 p.m., Emma in tow, though she hadn't been specifically invited. His face was a mask of careful neutrality, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight twitch in his jaw that had always betrayed his anxiety since childhood. Thomas was last, 10 minutes late, but at least without his new girlfriend. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. He gave me a quick hug as he entered. You okay, Mom? He whispered. Better than I've been in a long time, I replied honestly. Once they were all settled in the living room, I remained standing. This wasn't a casual family chat. This was, as Harold might have put it, a reclaiming. Thank you for coming, I began. I know you all have questions about Christmas, about your father's arrangements, about what happens next. I have answers, but first, I want to make something very clear. I looked at each of them in turn. I am not an obligation. I am not a problem to be managed. I am not a possession to be inherited. I am your mother, and I deserve respect. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Daniel stared at a point just above my head, his expression unreadable. For too long, I've allowed myself to be sidelined in my own family. That ends today. Your father's final gift to me wasn't the legal control he left me. It was the wake-up call I needed. I gestured toward the dining room. I've prepared some materials I'd like to discuss with each of you individually, but before that I want to hear from you. This isn't a monologue, it's a conversation, perhaps the first real one we've had in years. Silence greeted my invitation. No one, it seemed, wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Mum, I think I speak for all of us when I say we're sorry if you felt overlooked. That was never our intention. Intentions and actions are different things, I replied. And feelings don't just happen, Daniel. They're responses to behavior. What do you want from us? Rebecca asked, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. I want what any mother wants, I said simply. To be treated with dignity, to be included in my children's lives in meaningful ways, to not have plans made about my future without my input. We were just trying to help, Rebecca insisted. You seemed so lost after Dad died. I was grieving, I corrected her. That's different from being incapable. Thomas, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. You're right, Mom, I've been awful. His voice caught. After Dad died, it was easier to stay away than to see you hurting, and then it became habit. I'm sorry. His directness startled me. Of my 3 children, Thomas had always been the most like Harold, emotionally honest, sometimes to a fault. Thank you, Tommy, I said softly. Daniel shifted strategies. About the company. We'll discuss the company in private, I interrupted. This isn't about business right now, this is about family. They're connected, he insisted. Only because you've made them so, I countered. The company was always meant to serve the family, not the other way around. Emma, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. If I may, she looked at Daniel briefly before continuing. I think what everyone is wondering is what exactly you want to change. Are you selling the house? Cutting us off financially? Taking over the company? Leave it to Emma to get straight to the material concerns. She had always been practical to a fault. What I want, I said carefully, is to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect. The financial arrangements, the company decisions, those are secondary. They're leverage, not goals. Leverage? Daniel repeated, his voice rising slightly. You're using Dad's will to manipulate us? I prefer to think of it as establishing boundaries, I replied calmly. Something I should have done years ago. I moved toward the dining room. Now I'd like to speak with each of you individually, starting with Rebecca. The rest of you can enjoy some coffee and cinnamon rolls while you wait. Rebecca followed me reluctantly into the dining room, where I closed the pocket doors for privacy. I gestured for her to take a seat and sat across from her. Let's talk about the main property, I began, opening one of the folders. For the next hour I had separate conversations with each of my children. With Rebecca, I addressed the vacation home she had been secretly renting out, a property that had been in Harold's family for generations. You'll transfer the rental income to the family trust, I told her, and from now on, any use of the property will be scheduled through me, with priority given to family vacations. With Daniel, the conversation was tenser, focused on the company's direction. I'm calling a board meeting next week, I informed him. I've been reviewing the books, the expansion plans, everything. There will be changes. His face flushed. You can't just walk in and... I can, I interrupted. I should have been more involved from the beginning. That was my mistake, and I'm correcting it now. With Thomas, the youngest and least established of my children, the conversation centered on his perpetual financial struggles and repeated career changes. Your father set up a trust specifically for you, I explained, showing him the documents. But it's conditional on you demonstrating financial responsibility, monthly check-ins with me, a budget we both agree on, and continued progress in your career, whatever career you choose. By the time our individual meetings concluded, the winter afternoon was fading into early evening. I gathered them all back in the living room. I know this has been a lot to process, I said. You don't need to decide anything today. Take the documents home, review them. Think about what kind of family you want us to be going forward. And if we don't agree with your terms? Daniel asked bluntly. Then we'll have another conversation, I replied. This isn't an ultimatum, Daniel. It's an invitation to something better than what we've had, but it does require change, from all of us. As they prepared to leave, I handed each of them a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. What's this? Rebecca asked. Something of your father's, I said. He wanted each of you to have it, a reminder. Inside each package was one of Harold's treasured books, with passages marked that he had thought particularly relevant to each child. For Daniel, Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, a reminder that pursuit without purpose leads to emptiness. For Rebecca, Austen's Pride and Prejudice, with its lessons on hasty judgments and their consequences. For Thomas, Steinbeck's East of Eden, with its theme of choosing one's own path. After they left, I sat alone in Harold's study, surrounded by his books, his papers, the remnants of his life. But for the first time since his death, I didn't feel overwhelmed by his absence. Instead, I felt his presence, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a foundation upon which I could build something new. My phone buzzed with a text from Jean. How did it go? I thought about the question, about the cautious expressions on my children's faces, about the uncertain path ahead. "It's a beginning," I replied. "That's all I can ask for now." As night fell, I walked through the quiet house, turning off lights, straightening cushions, restoring order. In the hallway, I paused before the family portrait taken on our 40th wedding anniversary, Harold and me in the center, surrounded by our children and grandchildren. Everyone smiling, everyone playing their part in the perfect family tableau. "We'll do better this time," I promised the frozen image of my husband. "For real this time." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it might be possible. The following week passed in a flurry of preparation. If I was going to reclaim my place in the family business, I needed to understand exactly what I was walking into. Years of politely declining detailed financial reports in favor of Daniel's simplified summaries had left me with significant knowledge gaps. No more. I called Walter again, this time requesting all company records for the past 5 years. He arrived the next morning with 3 banker's boxes full of files and a portable hard drive containing digital records. "Harold kept copies of everything," he explained, as he helped me carry the boxes into the dining room, which I had converted into a makeshift office. He didn't entirely trust the digital versions, said they were too easy to alter. That sounded like my husband. Harold had embraced computers and technology for efficiency, but he'd never abandoned his paper trails. Trust, but verify, had been one of his favorite phrases. For 3 days, I barely slept. I pored over financial statements, board minutes, strategic plans, and employee records. I made notes, flagged questionable decisions, and identified patterns that concerned me. The dining room table disappeared under spreadsheets and sticky notes. I called old friends from the business, people who had worked with Harold but had been nudged into retirement after his death, and asked careful questions. What emerged was troubling. Daniel had been systematically restructuring the company away from Harold's vision of a family-owned manufacturing business with deep community roots and long-term stability. Instead, he was positioning it for either rapid expansion funded by significant debt or, more likely, an eventual sale to one of our larger competitors. Most concerning were the changes to the employee pension plan and healthcare benefits. Harold had always prided himself on providing security for the families that depended on Thornton Manufacturing. Many of our employees had been with us for decades. I knew their spouses, had attended their children's weddings, had sent flowers when they lost parents. They weren't just workers, they were extensions of our family. Daniel had been gradually reducing those benefits while simultaneously increasing executive compensation, primarily his own. The changes were incremental enough to avoid immediate alarm, but would have devastating long-term effects. On Thursday evening, Jean came over to help me prepare for the board meeting scheduled for Friday morning. My sister had worked in corporate finance before her retirement and understood the nuances I was still grappling with. "He's been clever about it," she said as we reviewed the pension plan changes. "Each modification seems reasonable in isolation. It's only when you look at the cumulative effect that you see the real impact." "I should have been paying attention," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "Harold would be so disappointed." Jean reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Harold would understand that you were grieving, and he clearly anticipated this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left you with the means to fix it." "If I can fix it," I murmured. "Margaret Eleanor Thornton," Jean said sternly, using my full name as she had since childhood. "I have never known you to back down from a fight when it mattered, and this matters." She was right, of course. It did matter, not just for me, but for all the families who depended on Thornton Manufacturing, for Harold's legacy, for the kind of mother and businesswoman I wanted to be remembered as. "Now," Jean continued briskly, "let's talk strategy. The board has 7 members, correct? You, Daniel, the 3 outside directors Harold appointed, and the 2 executives who hold minority shares." I nodded. "Walter says I have enough voting power to override them all if necessary, but I'd rather build consensus." "Of course you would," Jean smiled. "You've always preferred harmony to confrontation, but be prepared for the possibility that harmony isn't an option this time." By Friday morning I was ready, or as ready as I could be. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that Harold had always said made me look formidable. My mother's pearls, sensible but elegant heels, hair neatly styled, makeup subtle but polished. "Armor up," as Harold used to say before difficult meetings. The company headquarters was located in an industrial park about 20 minutes from our home. The building was modern but understated, glass and steel softened by landscaping that I had helped design when it was built 15 years ago. The Japanese maples I had selected were mature now, their graceful forms framing the entrance. As I walked through the front doors for the first time in over a year, I was greeted by surprised looks from the reception staff. "Mrs. Thornton," exclaimed Maria, who had been with us since the beginning. "It's so wonderful to see you." "Thank you, Maria," I smiled warmly. "It's good to be back." "We've missed you," she said, and I could see the sincerity in her eyes. "It hasn't been the same." "I've missed being here too," I replied, more than I realized. As Maria buzzed me through to the executive area, I noticed subtle changes in the office layout. The comfortable seating area where Harold had encouraged employees to take coffee breaks had been replaced with sleek, minimalist furniture that looked impressive but uninviting. The walls, once decorated with photos of company picnics and long-term employee recognition events, now displayed abstract art and framed business magazine covers featuring Daniel. The boardroom was at the end of the hall, a spacious room with windows overlooking the production floor below. Harold had insisted on that design feature, saying it would remind the leadership that every decision they made affected the people working below. The board members were already assembled when I arrived. Daniel sat at the head of the table, Harold's old seat, looking confident and completely unsurprised by my presence. He would have been notified of the meeting, of course, but I suspected he didn't believe I would actually show up. The other board members included Richard and Anthony, two executives who had been with the company for nearly 20 years, and the three outside directors, Eleanor Hayes, a retired banker, George Wilson, a former supplier, and Michelle Diaz, an attorney specializing in manufacturing regulations. All of them had been personally selected by Harold for their integrity and business acumen. "Mother," Daniel greeted me formally, "how nice of you to join us." "Daniel," I nodded, then greeted each board member by name. I could see the uncertainty in their expressions. They knew about Harold's will. At least they knew that I held significant voting power, but they had grown accustomed to my absence, to Daniel's leadership. My presence disrupted the status quo they had established. "I believe that's my seat," I said calmly, indicating the chair at the head of the table. A flicker of annoyance crossed Daniel's face, but he stood and moved to the chair to the right. "Of course, though traditionally the CEO..." "Traditionally," I interrupted, "the majority shareholder chairs the board, as you know." I took my seat and opened the leather portfolio Jean had helped me prepare. "Shall we begin with a review of the agenda? I've taken the liberty of making some additions." For the next 3 hours, I systematically addressed each area of concern I had identified. I questioned the aggressive debt strategy Daniel had been pursuing. I challenged the reduction in employee benefits. I expressed concern about the decreased investment in research and development. Throughout, I was careful to frame my concerns within the context of Harold's original vision for the company. This wasn't about undermining Daniel's leadership. It was about preserving the values upon which Thornton Manufacturing had been built. Daniel's initial smugness gave way to thinly veiled irritation as the meeting progressed. When I proposed a resolution to restore the pension benefits to their previous levels, he finally lost his composure. "This is financially irresponsible," he snapped. "We're competing in a global market now. We can't afford to be sentimental about employee benefits that cut into our profit margins." "Sentimentality has nothing to do with it," I replied evenly. "Long-term employee loyalty and stability create value that doesn't show up on quarterly reports, but is nonetheless real. Your father understood that." "My father," Daniel said, his voice tight, "built this company in a different era. Things have changed. Values shouldn't change," I countered. "And the values of this company include taking care of the people who have dedicated their lives to its success." I turned to the other board members. "I'd like to call for a vote on the resolution to restore the original pension and healthcare benefits, effective immediately." The room was silent for a moment. Then Eleanor, the retired banker, spoke up. "If I may, I'd like to see projections on how this would impact our financials over the next 5 years." "Of course," I nodded. "I've prepared those." I distributed the documents Jean and I had worked on, showing how the benefit restoration could be funded by modest adjustments to executive compensation and a slight reduction in the aggressive expansion plans. "This allows us to honor our commitments to employees while still pursuing responsible growth," I explained. The board members reviewed the projections thoughtfully. I could see Daniel growing increasingly tense as the mood in the room shifted. When the vote came, it was 5-2 in favor of my resolution. Only Daniel and Anthony opposed. We moved on to the next items on my agenda, a review of the company's community engagement initiatives which had been significantly reduced under Daniel's leadership, and a proposal for a more transparent succession planning process. By the time the meeting concluded, it was clear that a new dynamic had been established. I wasn't taking over day-to-day operations. Daniel would remain CEO, but the company's direction would no longer be solely his to determine. As the board members filed out, Michelle Diaz, the attorney, paused beside my chair. "Harold would be proud," she said quietly. "He always said you were the backbone of this family." "Thank you," I replied, unexpectedly moved by her words. "That means a great deal." Daniel remained after the others had gone, his expression a complex mixture of anger and calculation. "Was this necessary?" he asked when we were alone. "You could have discussed your concerns with me privately. Would you have listened?" I asked simply. His silence was answer enough. "Daniel," I said, softening my tone, "this isn't a power play. This is about protecting what your father built, what we built together, for all of us, including you." "It feels like punishment," he said stiffly. "For Christmas dinner." "It's not," I assured him. "Christmas was a wake-up call, yes. But these concerns about the company's direction are separate. I should have been more involved all along. That was my mistake." He gathered his papers, his movements precise and controlled. "So what happens now? You'll be attending all the board meetings, reviewing all my decisions?" "Not all," I said, "but the significant ones, yes. We'll need to establish a better communication system." He nodded tersely. "I'll have my assistant set up a weekly meeting." It wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for, but it was a start, an acknowledgement, however reluctant, of my place in the company and in his life. After Daniel left, I sat alone in the boardroom for a while, looking down at the production floor where employees were going about their work, unaware of the changes that had just been set in motion, changes that would benefit them, protect them. I had accomplished what I came to do, but the victory felt hollow without family harmony. The business could be restructured with votes and resolutions, but relationships required something else entirely, something less tangible, but far more valuable. As I was leaving the building, Maria caught me at the reception desk. "Mrs. Thornton, will we be seeing you more regularly now?" There was hope in her question, and it warmed something in me that had been cold for too long. "Yes, Maria," I smiled. "I think you will." That evening, I received a text from Thomas. "Heard about the board meeting. Daniel's furious. Well done, Mom." A small acknowledgement, but it felt significant. Thomas had always been caught in the middle. Less driven than Daniel, less entitled than Rebecca, trying to find his own way. His approval, even in this small form, mattered. Rebecca called the following morning. "I think we should talk," she said without preamble. "About Maine, about Christmas, about everything." "I'd like that," I replied, careful to keep my voice neutral despite the surge of hope I felt. "Sunday brunch?" she suggested. "Just the two of us?" "Perfect," I agreed. After we hung up, I went to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. The bird feeders Harold and I had maintained for years were empty now. I'd neglected them in the months after his death, and the birds had long since abandoned them. Perhaps it was time to fill them again, to invite life back into spaces that had been empty for too long. I found the seed in the garage, still sealed in the storage container Harold had bought. The familiar routine of filling the feeders was soothing, a small, concrete task that connected me to countless Sunday mornings when Harold and I had done this together, coffee mugs in hand, planning our week while chickadees and finches darted around us. By the time I finished, my hands were dirty, but my heart felt lighter. Rebuilding a family, like restoring an abandoned garden, would take time and consistent effort. There would be setbacks, disappointments, moments when it would seem easier to give up than to continue. But as I watched a brave chickadee discover the newly filled feeder, the first returning visitor to a place that had once been a reliable source of nourishment, I felt a quiet certainty. This was possible. Difficult, yes. Uncomfortable at times, certainly, but possible. That night I dreamed of Harold. Not as he was at the end, thin and tired and worried about leaving me, but as he had been in the fullness of our life together, strong, laughing, his hand steady on my back as we navigated a crowded room or a difficult conversation with the children. "You're doing fine, Maggie," he said in the dream. "Just fine." I woke with tears on my face but peace in my heart. The path ahead was becoming clearer, one small step at a time, not back to what had been, but forward to something new yet rooted in the values that had always mattered most to us. A family rebuilt on truth, on respect, on the kind of love that doesn't erase boundaries but honors them. The next chapter was beginning. Sunday brunch with Rebecca was set for 11 taas at Marigold's, a small cafe downtown, that had been a favorite of ours when the children were younger. Harold and I used to take them there after church, the five of us squeezed into a corner booth, sharing bites of each other's plates and planning the week ahead. I arrived early, as is my habit, and requested a table by the window. The cafe had changed owners a few times over the years, but the essential character remained the same. Mismatched vintage chairs, local art on the walls, the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods permeating the air. Rebecca arrived precisely on time, looking polished and professional as always, in tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a smooth ponytail, highlighting the strong features she'd inherited from Harold, the defined jawline, the straight nose. She spotted me immediately and made her way to the table with the confident stride that had always opened doors for her, from high school student council to corporate boardrooms. "Mom," she greeted me, leaning down to brush a kiss against my cheek before taking the seat opposite. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied. "So do you." An awkward silence fell as we both reached for our menus, though I suspected neither of us needed to read them. Some habits are comforting in their familiarity. After we ordered, French toast for me, avocado toast with poached eggs for her, Rebecca folded her hands on the table, a gesture reminiscent of how she would prepare for school presentations as a child. "I've been thinking a lot since Christmas," she began, "about what you said about how we've been treating you and about the main property." I waited, giving her space to continue without interruption. "It started innocently enough," she said. "James and I were planning to use the house for a weekend, and a colleague mentioned they were looking for a place in that area. It seemed like a win-win. They would enjoy the house, cover the maintenance costs, and it wouldn't sit empty. But it didn't stop at one weekend," I observed mildly. Rebecca had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, it was so easy to arrange, and the extra income was convenient, especially with the boys' tuition increases. Before I knew it, we were booking it most weekends from May through October." Our food arrived, creating a natural pause in the conversation. I took a bite of my French toast, giving myself time to consider my response. "What bothers me isn't the practical arrangement," I said finally. "It's that you didn't discuss it with me. That house has been in our family for 3 generations. Your grandfather renovated it with his own hands. Your father and I spent our honeymoon there. You and your brothers learned to swim in that lake." "I know," Rebecca sighed. "I should have asked. I got used to making decisions without consulting you after Dad died. You seemed so fragile, and Daniel said we needed to protect you from stress." "Daniel said that, did he?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Rebecca looked up from her plate. "He meant well, Mom. We all did. It's just, somewhere along the way, protecting you turned into excluding you. And then excluding you became the new normal." Her honesty was refreshing, if painful to hear. "I understand," I said. "Grief changes people. It changed me too. But I'm not fragile, Rebecca. I never was. Sad, yes. Lost for a while, certainly, but not incapable." "I see that now," she admitted. "The way you handled the board meeting made that quite clear. Daniel was livid, by the way. Called me that night ranting about how you'd undermined his authority." "And what did you say?" I asked, curious about where her loyalties lay in the sibling dynamic. Rebecca surprised me with a small smile. "I told him he was lucky you didn't fire him outright, given what he's been doing with the company." "You knew?" This genuinely shocked me. Rebecca had always been closer to Daniel than to Thomas. She shrugged lightly. "Not the details, but I knew the direction he was taking wasn't what Dad would have wanted. James and I had dinner with them a few months ago, and Daniel was talking about positioning the company for maximum valuation in case of a strategic acquisition opportunity. He's planning to sell," I translated flatly. "I think so," Rebecca nodded, though he'll never admit it directly. "Too many people would object. The employees, the community, definitely Thomas, and now obviously you." We ate in silence for a few moments, digesting this confirmation of my suspicions, along with our food. "About the main house," Rebecca said eventually. "I've transferred all the rental income to the family account, as you asked, and I've cancelled the future bookings." "That's not necessary," I replied. "The summer bookings can stand. People have made their plans. But going forward, we should create a family calendar first, blocking off times when any of us might want to use it. The rental income should go to maintaining the property, with any excess added to the trust for the grandchildren's education, as your father intended." Rebecca looked relieved. "That's fair. More than fair. I'm not interested in punishment, Rebecca. I just want transparency and respect." "I understand," she said quietly. "And I am sorry, Mom. About Christmas, about the main house, about everything. We got so wrapped up in our own lives that we forgot you have a life too. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it meant the world to me. Thank you, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. That means a lot. The conversation shifted then, becoming lighter, more familiar. She told me about the boys' school activities, about a challenging project at work, about James's new hobby of brewing beer in their garage. You should come for dinner next Friday, she said as we were finishing. Nothing fancy, just family time. The boys actually asked if you could teach them that card game Dad used to play with them, the one with the betting chips. Dealer's choice, I smiled, remembering the hours Harold had spent teaching the grandchildren various card games. He had been a patient teacher, never letting them win but showing them how to improve their strategy with each hand. I'd love to. As we prepared to leave, Rebecca hesitated, then asked, "Have you spoken with Thomas since the board meeting?" "Just a text," I replied. "Why?" She frowned slightly. "I'm worried about him. Daniel asked him to support some initiative at the company. I don't know the details. And Thomas refused. Apparently, it got pretty heated. This was news to me. Thomas worked in the marketing department at Thornton Manufacturing, a position he'd taken somewhat reluctantly after several false starts in other careers. He and Daniel had always maintained a cordial, if distant, professional relationship. "I'll check in with him," I promised. After saying goodbye to Rebecca, I didn't immediately return home. Instead, I drove to the cemetery where Harold was buried. It had been a few weeks since my last visit. Winter weather and recent events had disrupted my usual routine. The cemetery was peaceful on this crisp winter afternoon, the bare trees etching delicate patterns against the pale blue sky. I made my way to Harold's grave, brushing away some fallen leaves from the simple headstone we had chosen together years before, during a pragmatic conversation about what we each wanted when the time came. "You were right," I said softly to the granite marker bearing his name. "About the children, about Daniel's plans for the company, about everything. I should have paid more attention while you were here to tell me yourself." A gentle wind rustled through the cemetery, carrying the distant sound of church bells. "But I'm listening now," I continued. "Better late than never, right?" "That's what you always said when I finally came around to your way of thinking on something." I smiled at the memory of his good-natured teasing whenever I would resist one of his ideas, only to eventually embrace it as my own. Harold had never been one to say, "I told you so." He'd simply welcome me to his viewpoint with a wink and that phrase, "Better late than never, Maggie." "Brunch with Rebecca went well," I told him, brushing my fingers across the cold stone. "One child down, 2 to go. You always said she had the most sense of the 3 when she wasn't distracted by keeping up appearances." I stayed for a while longer, updating him on the board meeting, on my plans for the company, on the small things that made up my days now. It wasn't that I believed he could hear me exactly, but the act of articulating my thoughts to him helped clarify them in my own mind. "I miss you," I said finally. "Every day, but I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm finding my way." As I drove home, I called Thomas. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. "Mom, everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I just had brunch with your sister and thought I'd check in with you too. Rebecca mentioned there might be some tension between you and Daniel." Thomas sighed heavily. "Did she tell you why?" "No, just that it was about something at the company." "It's a long story," he said. "Not really phone conversation material." "Dinner tomorrow," I suggested. "I could cook or we could order in." "Actually," he hesitated, "would you mind coming to my place instead? There's something I want to show you." Thomas lived in a converted warehouse downtown, an open-concept loft that Harold and I had helped him purchase 5 years ago when the building was first renovated. He'd always had an eye for interesting spaces and unconventional design. "I'd be happy to," I told him. "What time works for you?" 7 and Mom?" He paused. "Don't mention it to Daniel, okay?" This request troubled me. The siblings had their differences, but secrecy wasn't typically part of their dynamic. "All right," I agreed cautiously. "I'll see you tomorrow at 7. That evening, I received an email from Daniel with the subject line "Weekly Update," containing a concise summary of ongoing projects at Thornton Manufacturing and upcoming decisions requiring board approval. The tone was professional, neither warm nor hostile, a business communication between colleagues rather than a note from son to mother. It was progress of a sort, I supposed, acknowledging my role if not embracing it. I responded with equally professional thanks and a few clarifying questions about one of the projects. Baby steps. Monday evening, I arrived at Thomas's loft precisely at 7, carrying a bottle of the red wine he favored. The building had once been a textile factory, its industrial heritage still visible in the exposed brick walls and massive timber beams. Thomas's unit was on the top floor, with windows overlooking the river that had once powered the factory's machinery. He opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a quick, tight hug that reminded me suddenly of how tall he had grown, my youngest, now towering over me, with Harold's broad shoulders and my own unruly hair. "Thanks for coming, Mum," he said, ushering me inside. "Sorry for the mystery, it'll make sense soon." Thomas's loft always struck me as a physical manifestation of his mind, creative, somewhat chaotic, but with an underlying order that revealed itself over time. Art covered the walls, not in neat gallery-style arrangements, but in organic groupings that somehow worked together. Bookshelves overflowed with volumes on everything from architecture to zoology. A vintage motorcycle, non-functional but aesthetically striking, served as an unexpected sculpture in one corner. "Wine?" he offered, taking the bottle I'd brought. "Or I have that tea you like." "Tea would be lovely," I replied, settling onto his comfortable if slightly worn leather sofa. "Now what's this all about, Tommy?" He disappeared into the kitchen area, returning a few minutes later with a steaming mug for me and a glass of wine for himself. Instead of sitting, he went to his desk and returned with a folder. "First, I should explain about the argument with Daniel," he began, sitting beside me. "He wants to outsource the marketing department to cut costs. The entire team would be let go, replaced by an agency he's already selected." "Your team," I clarified. Though Thomas's title was modest, Marketing Communications Manager, he led a small but effective department of 5 people. "Right," he nodded. "People who have been with the company for years. People with families, mortgages, lives built around the stability Thornton Manufacturing has always provided. Dad's people." I understood his distress now. "And you refused to support this decision." "I did more than refuse," Thomas admitted, looking slightly abashed. "I told him I'd fight it every way I could, that it violated everything Dad stood for, that I'd go to the board, to the employees, to the local paper if necessary." "That would have gone over well," I remarked dryly. Thomas gave a rueful smile. "Yeah, he didn't appreciate the threat, told me I was being emotionally irrational and that I needed to think like an executive, not an employee. Sounds like Daniel," I sighed. "Here's the thing, though," Thomas continued, opening the folder he'd brought. "This isn't just about protecting jobs. It's about what I found when I started looking more closely at the agency Daniel wants to hire." He spread several documents on the coffee table between us. "The agency is called Meridian Creative. It's new, less than 2 years old, but they've been landing some impressive clients. Their proposal to us was extraordinarily competitive, significantly undercutting what our in-house team costs. That's concerning on its own," I noted. "Quality work isn't usually the cheapest option." "Exactly," Thomas agreed. "So I did some digging. Meridian Creative is owned by a holding company called Vertex Partners." He pulled out a corporate registration document, pointing to the listed principals. "And Vertex Partners is owned by James Harrison and Emma Thornton Walsh." I stared at the document in disbelief. "Rebecca's husband and Daniel's wife?" "Through some complex legal structuring, yes," Thomas confirmed. "They're using shell companies and minority partners to obscure the connection, but it's there if you know where to look." The implications were staggering. Daniel was proposing to fire loyal employees to contract with a company secretly owned by his wife and brother-in-law. The conflict of interest was glaring and potentially illegal. "Does Daniel know?" I asked. Thomas shrugged. "I'm not sure. 3 possibilities. He knows and is actively participating in the scheme. He suspects but is deliberately not asking questions, or he's completely in the dark and being manipulated by Emma and James. None of those options reflects well on him," I said quietly. "No," Thomas agreed. "And there's more." He showed me additional documents, emails obtained through his position in the marketing department, financial projections, meeting notes. Together they painted a disturbing picture of a systematic plan to hollow out Thornton Manufacturing from within, reducing its value as an ongoing business while increasing its value as an acquisition target. They're asset stripping, I realized, reducing costs by eliminating what made the company valuable to its employees and the community, focusing only on what would make it attractive to a buyer. "Dad would be devastated," Thomas said softly. "Everything he built, everything he valued about the business, they're dismantling it piece by piece." I sat back processing this betrayal. It was one thing to have different business philosophies. It was another entirely to deliberately undermine the company's foundational values for personal gain. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. "Why not bring it up at the board meeting?" "I needed to be sure," Thomas explained. "And I wasn't until yesterday, when I found the final connection between Meridian and James also." He hesitated. "I wasn't sure how you'd react, whether you'd want to confront this head-on or try to handle it quietly." "You were protecting me," I realized, "just like they claimed to be doing." Thomas looked pained. "Not like that. I know how much you value family harmony, how much you've always tried to smooth things over between us. I wasn't sure if you'd be ready for this kind of confrontation." I thought about that for a moment. He wasn't wrong about my historical approach to family conflict. I had always been the mediator, the one who found compromises, who encouraged forgiveness and understanding. Harold had been the boundary setter, the one who established consequences when lines were crossed. But people change. Circumstances change. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable. "What do you think we should do?" I asked Thomas. He seemed surprised by the question. "You're asking me? You found this information. You understand the business implications, and clearly you've given it thought." Thomas set down his wineglass and leaned forward, suddenly reminiscent of the earnest boy who used to explain his elaborate science projects to us at the dinner table. "I think we need to bring this to the board immediately, before any contracts are signed with Meridian. We should request an independent audit of all executive decisions made in the past year, particularly focusing on conflicts of interest. And," he paused, "I think Daniel needs to be suspended as CEO pending the investigation." It was decisive, direct, and exactly what Harold would have recommended. "You've thought this through," I observed. "I've had to," Thomas said simply. "Someone has to protect what Dad built." I reached for his hand, this youngest child who had always seemed to be searching for his place in the family constellation. "Your father would be so proud of you right now." Thomas's expression softened. "You think so?" "I know so," I assured him. This is exactly the kind of integrity he valued most. We spent the next 2 hours developing a plan of action. Walter would be our first call in the morning, followed by Michelle Diaz from the board. We would need to move quickly but carefully, gathering evidence without alerting Daniel, Emma, or James to our knowledge. As I prepared to leave, Thomas walked me to the door, then hesitated. "Mom, there's something else I should tell you about Christmas dinner." "What about it?" I asked, surprised by the change of subject. "I knew something was wrong with the family dynamics before that night," he admitted. "I'd seen how they treated you when they thought no one was watching. The eye rolls when you spoke, the way they'd talk over you or change the subject when you brought up Dad." "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked gently. "I tried in small ways," he said. "But I was complicit too. I didn't visit enough. I didn't step in when I should have. It was easier to withdraw than to confront them. I'm sorry for that." I touched his cheek, this sensitive son who noticed more than he revealed. "We're all learning, Tommy. The important thing is that we're doing better now." "We are," he agreed, "and we'll fix this too, together." As I drove home that night, my mind was churning with all I had learned. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined, extending beyond mere disrespect into actual corporate malfeasance. Daniel's actions weren't just hurtful to me personally, they threatened everything Harold and I had built, everything we had hoped to leave as our legacy. Yet alongside the hurt and anger, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity and purpose. The path forward was difficult but clear, and I wasn't walking it alone. Thomas was with me, steadfast and principled. Rebecca, in her own way, was finding her way back to what mattered. Even Walter and the board members represented connections to Harold's vision that remained intact. When I arrived home, the house was dark except for the porch light I'd left on. As I unlocked the door, I was struck by how different it felt entering this space now, compared to just a few weeks ago. Then it had felt like a mausoleum of memories, a place where I rattled around alone with ghosts of happier times. Now it felt like a base of operations, a place from which I could act and influence the world around me. The dining room table covered in documents, the study where I made important calls, the kitchen where I fortified myself for the battles ahead. Each space had taken on new purpose. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to Harold's study, settling into his leather chair that still held the imprint of his form. On the desk was the photograph of our whole family taken at our 40th anniversary celebration. Everyone smiling, everyone playing their assigned roles in the family drama. How much had been happening beneath those smiling surfaces even then? "We're going to fix this," I promised Harold's smiling image. "Not just for us, but for everyone who depends on Thornton Manufacturing, for your legacy. I didn't need his letter to tell me what to do now. I already knew. The time for gentle reconciliation had its place, but so did firm boundaries and clear consequences. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and painful revelations. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the quiet strength that comes from knowing you're standing on solid ground. Moral clarity is its own kind of power. The path ahead would not be easy, but it would be right. And sometimes, that's enough to keep moving forward. The next morning dawned grey and cold, with a light snow falling, the kind that doesn't accumulate but dusts everything with a delicate, temporary whiteness. By the time I finished my first cup of coffee, the flurries had stopped, and pale winter sunlight was struggling through the clouds. It felt fitting somehow, a brief darkness giving way to clarity, much like what we were about to bring to Thornton Manufacturing. I called Walter first, asking him to meet Thomas and me at my house as soon as possible. His response was immediate and unquestioning. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Margaret." Next, I called Michelle Diaz from the board. As the only attorney among the directors, her expertise would be crucial. "This sounds serious," she said after I gave her a brief, careful explanation over the phone. "I can clear my morning schedule. 9 o'clock at your house?" By 8:30, Thomas had arrived, carrying a laptop and additional files. He looked tired but determined, his jaw set in a way that reminded me powerfully of Harold facing a difficult business challenge. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted when I commented on his appearance. "Kept thinking of more connections, more evidence we should gather." "We'll get through this systematically," I assured him, squeezing his arm. "One step at a time." Walter arrived promptly, followed shortly by Michelle. We gathered around the dining room table, which had become my de facto command center over the past weeks. Thomas connected his laptop to the small printer in the corner, producing copies of key documents for everyone. For the next hour, we laid out everything Thomas had discovered about Meridian Creative, Vertex Partners, and the connections to James and Emma. Walter took meticulous notes while Michelle reviewed the legal implications, her expression growing increasingly grave. "This is a clear-cut conflict of interest," she confirmed when we had finished. "Multiple violations of corporate governance principles and possibly state business laws. The board has not only the right, but the obligation to act on this information." "How should we proceed?" I asked, looking from Walter to Michelle. Michelle tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notepad. "We need to call an emergency board meeting. Today, if possible. Present the evidence. Vote to suspend Daniel pending a full investigation and appoint an interim CEO." "The interim CEO should be you, Margaret," Walter said firmly. "As majority shareholder and Harold's widow, you have both the legal authority and moral standing." I hadn't expected this suggestion. "Me? But I've been away from day-to-day operations for years." "You won't be alone," Michelle assured me. "The executive team knows the operational details. You'd be providing leadership and strategic direction during the transition, and your presence would reassure employees and stakeholders that the company remains in family hands." I looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "You can do this, Mum. And I'll help however I can." The weight of the responsibility was daunting, but the alternative, letting Daniel continue to dismantle everything Harold had built, was unthinkable. "All right," I agreed, "but only until we determine the best long-term solution." Walter made the calls to arrange the emergency board meeting for 2 p.m. that afternoon. Michelle began drafting the necessary resolutions for the board to consider. Thomas continued organizing the evidence, creating a clear, chronological narrative of the scheme. And I sat quietly for a moment, thinking of what this would mean for our family. This wasn't just a business decision. It was the final fracturing of the facade we had maintained. After today, there would be no going back to polite pretense, to holiday dinners where we all played our assigned roles. The truth would be exposed, with all its ugly implications. But perhaps that was necessary. Perhaps the facade had been part of the problem all along, the smiling family portraits hiding the rot beneath. At noon, I made sandwiches for everyone, a small domestic task that felt grounding amid the tension and strategic planning. As we ate, Michelle outlined how the meeting would proceed. "I'll present the evidence as an independent board member," she explained. "That gives it more weight than if it comes directly from family. Walter will address the legal aspects. Thomas should be present as the person who uncovered the information, but he shouldn't lead the discussion since he's not a board member." "And me?" I asked. "You'll chair the meeting," she said. "Stay composed, focus on the facts, and emphasize that this is about preserving the company's integrity, not personal grievances." By 1:30, we were ready. Walter had confirmed that all board members would be present. including Daniel, who had been told only that there was an urgent governance matter requiring immediate attention. We drove separately to the company headquarters. As we walked through the lobby together, I noticed the curious glances from employees who weren't accustomed to seeing the four of us together, particularly on a day when no regular board meeting was scheduled. The boardroom was empty when we arrived. We arranged our materials at each place setting, copies of the evidence, the proposed resolutions, the legal citations Michelle had prepared. Thomas set up his laptop to display key emails and documents on the large screen at the end of the room. At precisely 2 p.m., the other board members began to arrive. Richard and Anthony entered together, looking confused but politely greeting everyone. Eleanor arrived next, raising an eyebrow at the unusual assembly, but taking her seat without comment. George was the last of the regular members to arrive, offering a warm handshake to each of us. Daniel entered at 2:05, his lateness a small power play he had adopted in recent years. He faltered momentarily when he saw Thomas at the table, then recovered his composure and took his usual seat to my right. "This must be important to bring everyone together on such short notice," he remarked, glancing at the folders placed at each setting, but not yet opening his. "It is," I confirmed, my voice steady, despite the emotional storm brewing inside me. "Thank you all for making time for this emergency meeting." I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes before continuing. "We've called this meeting to address a serious governance issue that has recently come to light. I'll ask Michelle to present the information, after which we'll discuss the appropriate board response." Daniel shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his features as he finally opened his folder and scanned the first page. His face hardened, but he remained silent as Michelle stood. With clinical precision, Michelle laid out the evidence Thomas had discovered. She explained the corporate structure of Meridian Creative, its connection to Vertex Partners, and the documented ownership by James Harrison and Emma Thornton Walsh. She detailed the proposed outsourcing of the marketing department, the below-market pricing in Meridian's proposal, and the clear conflict of interest this represented. "Furthermore," she continued, "our preliminary review suggests this is not an isolated incident. We've identified at least 3 other instances where company resources or opportunities may have been directed to entities connected to family members of senior executives." Throughout her presentation, Daniel sat motionless, his expression carved from stone. Only the whitening of his knuckles as he gripped his pen betrayed any emotion. When Michelle finished, Walter addressed the legal implications, his measured tone lending gravity to the serious breaches he outlined. Then it was my turn. I had prepared what I wanted to say, rehearsing it in my mind throughout the morning. But as I looked at Daniel, my firstborn, Harold's pride, I found myself departing from my planned remarks. "Before we proceed to discussing the board's response," I said, "I want to give Daniel an opportunity to address what we've presented." Daniel's head snapped up, surprise briefly replacing the controlled mask he had maintained. He hadn't expected to be given the floor. "That's appropriate," he said after a moment, gathering himself. "Thank you, Mother." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a gesture I recognized as one of Harold's, a habit Daniel had unconsciously adopted from his father. "The information presented contains several factual inaccuracies and mischaracterizations," he began, his voice taking on the confident tone he used in client presentations. "While there may appear to be connections between Meridian Creative and certain family members, these relationships were disclosed to the appropriate executives, and measures were put in place to ensure arm's-length transactions." It was a bold attempt at deflection, but I could see from the expressions around the table that no one was convinced. Eleanor in particular was frowning deeply, her banker's sensibilities clearly offended by what she was hearing. "To whom were these relationships disclosed, Daniel?" she asked sharply. "Not to the board, certainly." Daniel faltered momentarily. "The information was available in the supplementary materials provided during budget discussions. I've reviewed every document presented to this board for the past 5 years, George said quietly. There was no disclosure of any connection between Meridian Creative and any family member. Daniel's confident facade began to crack. "The relationships are complex and may not have been explicitly spelled out, but please don't compound the problem with dishonesty, Daniel," I interrupted, unable to watch him continue down this path. "The evidence is clear. The only question now is whether you were aware of the full extent of Emma and James's involvement, or if you were misled as well." A flash of anger crossed his face. "I don't need to be protected, Mother. I'm not a child." "No," I agreed sadly. "You're not. You're the CEO of a company with hundreds of employees who depend on its integrity and continued success. A company your father built with principles that explicitly rejected this kind of self-dealing. The mention of Harold seemed to hit Daniel like a physical blow. For a moment, I glimpsed the boy he had once been, desperate for his father's approval, crushed by even the mildest disappointment in Harold's eyes. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by a cold calculation that was entirely adult. If the board feels these matters require further review, I'm open to an independent audit, he offered, attempting to regain control of the narrative. In the meantime, I suggest we table the marketing department, outsourcing decision pending additional information. I'm afraid we need to go further than that, Michelle said firmly. The evidence suggests a pattern of governance failures that requires immediate action. She distributed copies of the resolutions she had prepared. We are proposing 3 actions. First, the immediate suspension of Daniel Thornton from the position of CEO pending a comprehensive investigation. Second, the appointment of Margaret Thornton as interim CEO during this period. Third, the establishment of an independent committee to review all major decisions and contracts from the past 2 years. Daniel's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Her transparent power grab orchestrated by... He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize that revealing Thomas's role would only confirm the validity of the evidence. By whom, Daniel? I asked quietly. By people concerned about the future of this company. By your father's legacy. He didn't respond, staring instead at the resolution documents before him. Eleanor cleared her throat. I believe we should proceed to a vote on these resolutions. The evidence is compelling, and our fiduciary duty to the company is clear. One by one, the board members voted. The result was unanimous, with only Daniel abstaining rather than voting against, perhaps a final strategic decision to avoid appearing to oppose an investigation into wrongdoing. And just like that, it was done. Daniel was suspended as CEO. I was appointed in his place. The investigation would begin immediately. As the meeting concluded, Daniel gathered his papers with mechanical precision, his movements controlled and deliberate. The others filed out quietly, the weight of what had transpired subduing even casual conversation. When only Daniel, Thomas, and I remained in the boardroom, Daniel finally spoke. I hope you're satisfied, he said, his voice low and bitter. You've humiliated me professionally and destroyed this family in the process. No, Daniel, I replied gently. You did that yourself when you decided that your father's values were expendable. His values, Daniel scoffed. His outdated, sentimental approach to business that would have driven this company into the ground eventually. I was saving Thornton Manufacturing, not destroying it. By secretly directing contracts to your wife's company, by planning to lay off loyal employees who helped build this business, Thomas interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. That's not saving anything, Dan. That's self-interest disguised as business strategy. Daniel turned on his brother. You've never understood what it takes to succeed in today's market. None of you have. You're all living in the past, clinging to Dad's vision like it's sacred scripture when it's just obsolete. The pain behind his words was palpable, and in that moment, I saw the real tragedy of our situation. Daniel hadn't just lost his way ethically. He had lost connection with the values that had shaped our family. Your father's vision wasn't about market share or profit margins, I said softly. It was about building something that served a purpose beyond enriching ourselves, something that created security for families, that contributed to the community, that would outlast us all. That's not obsolete, Daniel, that's timeless. He shook his head unmoved. Save the sentimentality, Mother. It doesn't change what you've done here today. No, it doesn't, I agreed. But neither does your anger change the facts of what you did. Daniel straightened his tie, another unconscious echo of Harold's mannerisms that broke my heart a little. I'll have my lawyer contact Walter about next steps, he said stiffly. I assume I should clear out my office immediately? There's no need for that drama, I assured him. Take what you need for now. The rest can wait until the investigation is complete. He nodded curtly and turned to leave, pausing at the door without looking back. You'll regret this, both of you. When you see what it actually takes to run this company in today's world, you'll understand what I was trying to do. After he left, Thomas and I sat in silence for a long moment. The victory, if it could be called that, felt hollow, necessary but devoid of any joy or satisfaction. Are you okay, Mom? Thomas asked finally. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. We all will be eventually. Even Daniel. I thought about my firstborn, about the little boy who had followed Harold around the original workshop, about the teenager who had been so proud to intern at the company, about the young man who had been so eager to prove himself when he joined the business after college. "I hope so," I said, "but that will be his choice." The news spread quickly throughout the company. By the time Thomas and I left the boardroom, Walter had already briefed the executive team, and Maria, at reception, gave me a warm, encouraging smile as we passed. "It's good to have you back for real, Mrs. Thornton," she said. Word must have reached Rebecca almost immediately as well. She called as I was driving home. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "Daniel's been suspended? You're running the company now?" "Yes," I confirmed. "There's a lot you don't know, Rebecca. Things involving James and Emma that we should discuss in person, not over the phone." She was quiet for a moment. "Does this have something to do with Meridian Creative?" I nearly swerved off the road in surprise. "You knew about that?" "Not everything," she said quickly. "Just that James and Emma had some connection to this marketing agency Daniel was excited about. James mentioned it at dinner a few weeks ago, then changed the subject when I asked questions. Come to the house," I said. "Now if you can. There's a lot we need to talk about." By the time I arrived home, Thomas was already there, having followed me in his own car. We had barely settled in the living room when Rebecca arrived, looking anxious and confused. "What's going on?" she demanded. "I just got a text from Emma saying we've declared war on the family. Daniel isn't answering my calls." Together, Thomas and I explained everything. The shell companies, the conflicts of interest, the planned outsourcing, the evidence that Daniel, Emma, and James had been systematically diverting company resources and opportunities for their own benefit. Rebecca listened in stunned silence, her expression shifting from disbelief to hurt to anger as the full picture emerged. "James told me they were minority investors in a friend's startup," she said finally. "He made it sound like a small side project. Nothing to do with Thornton Manufacturing. I had no idea." "We don't think you did," Thomas assured her. "Your name doesn't appear anywhere in the documents." Rebecca buried her face in her hands. "What happens now? To Daniel? To James and Emma? To all of us? The investigation will determine the next steps for the company," I explained. "As for our family, that depends on choices each of us makes going forward." Rebecca looked up, her eyes red but dry. "I need to talk to James, to understand if he knew what he was doing to our family." "Of course," I agreed. "But Rebecca, be prepared for the possibility that he did know and did it anyway." She nodded slowly, the reality of the situation settling over her. "I'll call the boys' school, have them stay with my friend Susan tonight. I don't want them home for this conversation." As she prepared to leave, Rebecca paused at the door. "Mom, I know this must be awful for you. Daniel was always so close to Dad, always seemed to embody everything Dad valued. To discover this betrayal. It's painful," I acknowledged, "but what matters now is how we move forward, with truth, with integrity, and hopefully, eventually, with healing." She hugged me tightly and I felt her tears against my cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything, for not seeing, for not stopping this somehow." "This isn't your burden to carry," I assured her. "Just focus on your own truth now." After Rebecca left, Thomas and I spent the evening planning for the days ahead. My first day as interim CEO would be tomorrow, and there was much to prepare. We created a list of priorities: communications to employees, reassurance to key clients, meetings with department heads, coordination with the investigation team Walter was assembling. "You should stay here tonight," I suggested, as the hour grew late. "Your old room is still set up." Thomas looked surprised but pleased. "Really? You don't mind?" "I'd welcome the company, actually," I admitted. "It's a big house for one person." As we prepared for bed, I found myself walking through each room, straightening pictures, adjusting cushions, small domestic tasks that had always calmed me in times of stress. In Harold's study, I paused before his photograph, touching the frame gently. "I didn't see it coming," I told him softly. "How Daniel could stray so far from everything you taught him, everything we believed in together." The photograph offered no answers, of course, just Harold's smile, frozen in time, before any of us knew how things would unravel. "But I'm fixing it," I continued. "We're fixing it, Thomas and I, and maybe Rebecca too, not just for the company but for our family, for what matters." That night, in the quiet of my bedroom, I allowed myself to fully feel the grief of the day's events, not just for the professional betrayal, but for the deeper fracturing of our family. For the little boy Daniel had once been, for the relationship we might never fully repair, for Harold, who had been spared witnessing this painful chapter. I wept quietly. mourning what was lost, while acknowledging the necessity of the path we had chosen. Truth is rarely comfortable, but it is always necessary for genuine healing. In the morning, I would become CEO of Thornton Manufacturing. I would stand before employees who were nervous about the sudden change in leadership. I would begin the process of restoring the company's ethical foundation. But tonight I was simply a mother grieving for her family, for what had been lost, for what might still be saved, for all the complex threads of love and disappointment that bound us together despite everything. Tomorrow would be about action. Tonight was about acknowledgement. Both were necessary parts of the journey forward. As I drifted towards sleep, I thought I heard Harold's voice so clearly it might have been real. "You've got this, Maggie. You always did." Spring came early that year, as if nature itself was eager to wash away the remnants of a difficult winter. By mid-March, the first crocuses were pushing through the soil in my garden, and the Japanese maples at the company headquarters were showing hints of their delicate red leaves. 3 months had passed since I became interim CEO of Thornton Manufacturing. 3 months of early mornings and late nights, of difficult decisions and careful rebuilding. 3 months of learning to balance strength with compassion, accountability with forgiveness. The independent investigation had confirmed everything Thomas discovered and revealed even more. Daniel, Emma, and James had been systematically diverting company resources and opportunities for nearly 2 years. The marketing agency was just one thread in a complex web of self-dealing that included equipment leasing companies, real estate arrangements, and supplier contracts, all structured to benefit them personally while appearing to serve the company's interests. Daniel had resigned rather than face termination once the full report was presented to the board. Emma had left town briefly, returning only to initiate divorce proceedings. Apparently, the scheme had been a final, desperate attempt to salvage their troubled marriage through financial success. James and Rebecca were attempting reconciliation through intensive counseling. Whether their marriage would survive remained uncertain, but Rebecca had shown remarkable resilience throughout the ordeal. She had immediately stepped away from any funds connected to James's activities and had thrown herself into community service, working particularly with families affected by corporate downsizing, a choice that felt like both penance and purpose. Thomas had emerged as an unexpected source of stability. Initially reluctant to take on more responsibility at the company, he had gradually stepped into a more significant role, working closely with me to rebuild trust with employees and clients. His marketing team, saved from outsourcing, had developed a campaign emphasizing the company's renewed commitment to its founding values, featuring stories of long-term employees and community impact. As for me, the role of CEO had fit better than I had anticipated. Harold had always involved me in key decisions, even when I wasn't officially part of the management team. I knew the business, knew the people, understood the values that should guide our choices. The operational details I could learn or delegate to those with expertise. What the company had needed most wasn't a financial wizard or marketing genius. It was moral clarity and consistent leadership. That I could provide. The board had recently approached me about removing the interim from my title, making my position permanent until a succession plan could be developed. I had asked for time to consider the offer, to reflect on what I truly wanted for my future, and for the company's. That reflection had brought me to this moment, a special board meeting I had called to discuss the path forward. The boardroom was the same, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically since that difficult day in December when we had suspended Daniel. Today, there was an energy of renewal, of possibility. "Thank you all for coming," I began, looking around the table at the faces that had become partners in rebuilding. Before we discussed the main agenda items, I wanted to share some thoughts about our progress and future direction. I had prepared notes but set them aside, preferring to speak from the heart. When I stepped into this role 3 months ago, it was out of necessity, not ambition. Our company faced a crisis of leadership and values that threatened everything everything we had built over decades. The board members nodded, acknowledging the journey we had shared. Today I can say with confidence that Thornton Manufacturing has weathered that crisis. Our financial position is stabilizing, employee morale is improving. Our clients have remained loyal, many expressing appreciation for our renewed commitment to the principles that made this company special in the first place. I paused, gathering my thoughts for what came next. The board has generously offered to make my position as CEO permanent. I'm deeply honored by your confidence. But after careful consideration, I believe the company needs something different for its long-term leadership. Someone who combines the wisdom of experience with the energy and vision for the future. I turned to Thomas, who sat quietly at the side of the room, not officially part of the meeting but present at my request. I'm proposing a 2-year transition plan, during which I will continue as CEO while training my successor. I smiled at the surprise on Thomas's face. Someone who has demonstrated not only business acumen, but more importantly, an unwavering commitment to the values upon which this company was founded. The board members followed my gaze to Thomas, several nodding with understanding. Thomas hasn't asked for this role, I continued. In fact, he'll probably be quite shocked by this suggestion, but over these past months, I've watched him grow into a leader who embodies the best of his father's principles while bringing his own unique strengths to the table. Thomas stared at me, his expression a mixture of astonishment and something else. A dawning recognition, perhaps, of his own potential that others had seen before he did. This wouldn't be an immediate transition, I clarified. Rather, a gradual process of increasing responsibility, mentorship, and preparation. During this time, I would step back incrementally while remaining available as an advisor and board member. Eleanor was the first to respond. I think it's an excellent proposal. Thomas has impressed all of us during this difficult period. His integrity is unquestionable, and he's shown a natural gift for bringing people together around a shared purpose. The other board members voiced similar support, with Michelle adding, "This kind of thoughtful succession planning is exactly what the company needs after the recent turbulence. It provides stability while looking forward." "Thomas," I said gently, "you haven't had a chance to respond. This isn't a decision you need to make today, but I wanted to present it to you formally in front of the board." Thomas cleared his throat, visibly processing the unexpected proposal. I'm honored," he began, "and honestly, a little overwhelmed. This wasn't something I ever saw for myself. The best leaders often don't seek the role," George observed. "They accept it as a responsibility rather than a prize." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'd need time to consider it properly, to be sure I'm the right person, that I could honor what this company means to our family, to the employees, to the community. Take whatever time you need," I assured him. "This isn't about filling a position, it's about finding the right path forward for everyone." The meeting continued with discussions of quarterly results and strategic initiatives, but I could see Thomas's mind was elsewhere, contemplating the future I had just placed before him. After the board adjourned, Thomas and I walked together through the production floor, a habit Harold had maintained throughout his leadership, staying connected to the heart of the business. "You really think I could do it?" he asked quietly, as we nodded to employees operating the machinery. "Lead the company? I know you can," I replied. "You've already been doing it in many ways, just without the title." "But I'm not Daniel," he said. "I don't have his business education, his connections, his what?" I interrupted gently. "His willingness to compromise principles for profit? His belief that employees are expendable? You're right, Thomas, you're not Daniel. That's precisely why you're the right choice." We stopped by a workstation where Martin, a machine operator who had been with the company for over 30 years, was training a young apprentice. Both men smiled in greeting. "Mrs. Thornton! Tommy!" Martin called over the machinery noise. "Come see what Jenny here just learned to do." With obvious pride, he stepped back to let the young woman demonstrate her newly acquired skill, operating complex equipment with growing confidence. "That's excellent work, Jenny," Thomas said, his genuine interest evident as he asked questions about the process and her training experience. As we walked away, I noticed the thoughtful expression on Thomas's face. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "About Dad," he replied. "About how he always said the company wasn't just about making parts, it was about making opportunities. I think I'm finally understanding what he meant." "That's why you'd be good at this," I told him. "You see beyond the balance sheet to the human impact of every decision." We completed our walk through the facility and returned to the executive offices, where I had one more piece of business to address. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," I said, closing my office door. "Something about the family, not just the company." Thomas sat across from me, curious. "What is it?" I opened my desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope. "I received this yesterday, from Daniel." Thomas's expression hardened slightly. "What does he want now?" "It's not what you might expect," I said, handing him the letter I had read several times already. Daniel's handwriting was neat and precise, just like Harold's, one of many traits he had inherited from his father. Thomas read aloud, "Mother, it has taken me these months of separation from the company and from our family to gain clarity about my actions and their consequences. While I still believe that some of my business strategies were sound, I now recognize that the methods I chose to implement them betrayed the trust placed in me, both as CEO and as Harold Thornton's son. This is not an attempt to regain my position or to excuse my behavior. Rather, it is the beginning of what I hope will be a long process of making amends, professionally and personally. I have enclosed documentation of all remaining business entities connected to the schemes you discovered, including those not identified in the investigation. I have dissolved these entities and returned all proceeds to the appropriate parties where possible, or to charitable foundations where direct restitution could not be made. As for our family relationship, I understand that trust, once broken, cannot be instantly restored. I don't ask for or expect immediate forgiveness. What I hope for eventually is an opportunity to rebuild some form of relationship, not as it was before, but perhaps something more honest, more respectful than what we had allowed it to become. I am in therapy, learning to examine the driving forces behind my choices, the constant need to prove myself, to exceed expectations, to be seen as successful at any cost. This is not to deflect responsibility, but to ensure I address the root causes of my behavior. I will be in town next month for a meeting with the attorneys finalizing my separation agreement. If you would be willing to meet for coffee, just a brief initial conversation, I would be grateful for the opportunity. Regardless of your decision, please know that I am sorry for the pain I have caused you, Thomas, Rebecca, and everyone connected to Thornton Manufacturing. Daniel. Thomas lowered the letter, his expression complicated. Do you believe him? I want to, I admitted. The Daniel who wrote this sounds more like the son I raised than the man he had become these past few years. People can change, Thomas acknowledged, or return to themselves, maybe. Walter verified the information about the business entities, I added. Everything checks out. Daniel has indeed unwound all the remaining questionable arrangements. Thomas handed the letter back to me. Are you going to meet with him? I nodded. I think so. Not with expectations or illusions, but with openness to possibility. Would you like me to come with you? The offer touched me deeply. Thank you, but I think this first meeting should be just between Daniel and me. If it goes well, perhaps the next one could include you and Rebecca. Thomas nodded, understanding. A first step. Exactly, I agreed. A first step on a very long road. Later that evening, Rebecca came for dinner, a weekly tradition we had established since the family's fracturing. Thomas joined us, and the three of us shared a simple meal in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room. The informality felt right, allowing conversation to flow more naturally than around the loaded symbolism of the dining table where so many family dynamics had played out. I showed Rebecca Daniel's letter. She read it silently, tears welling in her eyes. This sounds like the brother I remember, she said finally, before everything got so competitive and complicated. Do you think there's hope for him? For all of us? Thomas asked. Rebecca considered this. James and I are trying to rebuild after his part in all this. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, learning to trust again, to believe in the possibility of change. Some days I think we'll make it. Other days, I'm not so sure. She looked up from the letter. But I'm glad we're trying. That's all we can do, really. Try with eyes open but hearts not completely closed. I reached across the table and took each of their hands in mine. That's all any of us can do. Try with open eyes and receptive hearts. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the simple gesture of connected hands, saying what words could not fully express, that despite everything, we remained a family. Different now, perhaps stronger in the broken places, but still fundamentally connected. I've been thinking, Rebecca said, breaking the silence, about the main house. What about it? I asked. Summer will be here before we know it. What if we all went up there for a week? You, me, Thomas, the boys? A family vacation like we used to have. I'd like that, Thomas said, surprising me with his quick agreement. He had often avoided family vacations as an adult, preferring solo travel or trips with friends. We could invite Daniel too, Rebecca continued cautiously. Not for the whole time, but maybe for a weekend, if your coffee meeting goes well. I squeezed their hands, deeply moved by this gesture toward healing. One step at a time, I reminded gently. But yes, that sounds wonderful. After dinner, as we lingered over coffee and the apple pie I had baked that afternoon, the conversation turned to memories, not the recent painful ones, but older, happier times. The fishing trips with Harold. The summer Rebecca broke her arm climbing the old oak tree. The time Thomas got lost in the mall and was found in the pet store, seriously negotiating with the clerk to buy a puppy with his allowance money. Remember Dad's Christmas Eve ritual? Rebecca asked, smiling at the memory. Reading The Night Before Christmas, no matter how old we got, insisting we all wear those ridiculous matching pajamas for the family photo, and leaving those detailed notes for Santa about exactly where to put each present, Thomas added, as if Santa needed instructions. He was a man who liked things done properly, I laughed. Even imaginary gift delivery. As the evening wound down, Thomas helped clear the dishes while Rebecca put leftovers in containers to take home. "Mom," she said as she prepared to leave, "I've been meaning to ask you something. The house, this house, it's so big for just you. Have you thought about what you want to do long term?" It was a question I had been considering myself. "I'm not ready to leave it yet," I said. "Too many memories here, too much of your father in every room. But you're right, it's more space than I need." "You could come live with us," she offered. "We have the guest suite that's practically its own apartment. The boys would love having you closer." "That's very kind," I smiled, "but I think I need my independence a while longer, though I may take you up on that offer to visit more often." After they left, I walked through the quiet house, turning off lights and straightening cushions, the evening ritual that had become both habit and comfort. In the living room, I paused before the family photographs arranged on the mantel. The most prominent was still the portrait from our 40th anniversary, the last professional photo taken before Harold's illness. All of us together, smiling for the camera, presenting the image of the perfect family while hiding the fractures that had already begun to form beneath the surface. Beside it now stood newer photos, candid shots from recent months. Thomas laughing as he helped me in the garden, Rebecca and the boys making Christmas cookies in my kitchen. Moments of genuine connection captured not by a professional photographer, but by ourselves, for ourselves. The contrast between the polished perfection of the formal portrait and the messy authenticity of the candid shots seemed to summarize our journey, from facade to reality, from performance to truth. I touched the frame of the anniversary portrait gently. "We're finding our way, Harold," I whispered. "Not back to what was, but forward to something real." The next morning dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect early spring days that hints at the warmth to come while still carrying the crispness of winter. I decided to work from home, allowing myself the luxury of a slower start to the day. After breakfast, I gathered my gardening tools and headed outside. The flower beds needed attention after the winter months, clearing away dead leaves, cutting back spent growth, making space for new life to emerge. As I worked, kneeling in the soft earth with the sun warming my back, I reflected on the past few months. The Christmas dinner that had changed everything, Harold's letter that had given me the strength to stand up for myself, the painful revelations about Daniel, the unexpected emergence of Thomas as a leader, Rebecca's journey toward forgiveness, my own transformation from grieving widow to company leader to, what now? A woman redefining herself yet again, finding new purpose in each chapter. The garden offered its own wisdom, that growth requires both nurturing and pruning, that renewal follows dormancy, that beauty emerges from cycles of loss and restoration. I was so absorbed in my work and thoughts that I didn't immediately notice the car pulling into the driveway, a taxi stopping at the curb, and then a familiar figure emerging, retrieving a suitcase from the trunk. Daniel. He stood uncertainly at the end of the walkway, looking smaller somehow, less imposing than I remembered. He had lost weight, and his usually immaculate appearance was slightly rumpled from travel. I rose slowly, brushing dirt from my hands, and walked toward him. "You're early," I said when I reached him, referencing his letter that had mentioned a visit next month. "I wasn't expecting you yet." "I know," he replied, his voice carrying none of the confidence or authority it once had. "I finished things in Boston sooner than anticipated. I was going to call, but then I thought I might lose my nerve." We stood for a moment in awkward silence, two people who had once been as close as mother and son could be, now strangers in many ways. "Would you like to come in?" I offered finally. "I can make coffee." Relief washed over his face. "I'd like that, thank you." As we walked toward the house, I noticed him taking in the property with new eyes, the bird feeders now filled and busy with spring visitors, the emerging daffodils along the path, the garden tools scattered where I had been working. "The place looks good," he commented. "Different somehow." "It's coming back to life," I said simply. "As are we all, I suppose." In the kitchen, I washed my hands thoroughly before preparing coffee. Daniel sat at the counter, watching me move through the familiar routine. "I wasn't sure you'd be willing to see me at all," he admitted. "After everything." I measured coffee grounds, considering my response. There was a time right after the board meeting when I might not have been, but anger is exhausting to maintain, especially towards someone you've loved for a lifetime. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, a small domestic comfort amid the emotional complexity of the moment. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Daniel said, his voice low. "About Dad, about the company, about the kind of man I thought I needed to be." I leaned against the counter, giving him space to continue. "I think I misunderstood him in fundamental ways," he went on. "I saw his principles as constraints rather than strengths. I interpreted his concern for employees and community as business weakness rather than what it really was, the foundation everything else was built on. Your father was a businessman, yes," I acknowledged, "but he was a human being first. He never forgot that the company existed to serve people, not the other way around." Daniel nodded slowly. I lost sight of that. Somewhere along the way, the numbers became more real to me than the people behind them. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, Harold's old one for Daniel, a habit so ingrained I didn't even think about it until I saw him notice, his fingers tracing his father's initials on the ceramic. "He would have been so disappointed," Daniel said, his voice catching. "Yes," I agreed, not softening the truth, "but he would have wanted you to find your way back. That's what parents do. We hope for return, for restoration, even when the path has led very far astray." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, the first I had seen from him since he was a boy. "I don't know if I can fix what I've broken," he said. "With the company, with Thomas and Rebecca, with you. Some things can't be fixed," I told him gently, "but new things can be built in their place. Different but perhaps stronger for having acknowledged the weaknesses of what came before." We talked for hours, the morning stretching into afternoon, not solving everything, that would take much more time if it was possible at all, but beginning the process of honest communication that might eventually lead to healing. Daniel would not return to Thornton Manufacturing. That chapter was closed. But he spoke of teaching business ethics at a local university, of using his experience as a cautionary tale for future business leaders, of finding ways to contribute to the community he had once viewed only as a market to be leveraged. When he finally prepared to leave for his hotel, promising to return for dinner with all of us in a few days if everyone was willing, I walked him to the door. "Thank you for listening," he said, "for not turning me away." "We're family," I replied simply. "Imperfect, complicated, sometimes broken, but still family." After his taxi pulled away, I returned to my gardening, finding comfort in the concrete task of preparing the earth for new growth. The parallels weren't lost on me. The careful clearing away of what was dead or damaged, the gentle encouragement of tender new shoots, the patience required for transformation. As the afternoon light began to soften, I gathered my tools and took one last look at the garden beds, not yet in their full glory, but showing clear promise of what would come with time and care. Inside, I washed up and then called Thomas and Rebecca, inviting them to dinner later in the week. "Daniel will be there," I said, "if you're ready for that." Their responses were cautious but open, exactly as I had expected. This would be a gradual process for all of us, with steps forward and inevitable steps back. That evening, I sat in Harold's study, surrounded by his books, his papers, the artifacts of the life we had built together. I picked up a framed photograph from his desk, not the formal family portrait, but a candid shot taken at the lake house in Maine. Harold and I were sitting on the dock, gray-haired and middle-aged, laughing at something now forgotten. The children were visible in the background, young adults then engaged in their own conversations. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable except for the genuine joy it captured, the kind of everyday happiness that forms the true foundation of a meaningful life. "We're finding our way back to this," I told Harold's image. "Not to perfection or pretense, but to authentic connection, to family as it should be, honest, flawed, resilient." Outside, twilight was settling over the garden, where new growth was already pushing through the soil, tentative, vulnerable, but persistent in its determination to reach toward the light. Inside, I was no longer just a widow trying to preserve memories, but a woman actively creating a new chapter, as mother, as business leader, as family elder, guiding the next generation toward healing and renewal. The path ahead would not be without challenges. Daniel's return to the family circle would require patience and boundaries. Thomas's potential leadership of the company would bring its own complexities. Rebecca's marriage would continue to face the difficult work of rebuilding trust. And I would continue navigating my own journey, learning when to lead and when to step back, when to hold firm and when to forgive, how to honor Harold's memory while creating a future he could never have imagined. But on this quiet evening, with spring awakening outside my windows and new possibilities unfolding within our family, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before that fateful Christmas dinner. Not because everything was resolved or perfect, but because we were facing our truths together, stepping out of the shadows of pretense into the more challenging but ultimately more rewarding light of authenticity. The Christmas dinner betrayal had shattered our carefully maintained facade, but in that breaking, it had created space for something real to grow in its place, a family defined not by appearances, but by the strength to face our flaws, the courage to begin again, and the wisdom to value connection above all else. And in that realization, I found not just acceptance but hope, the most enduring gift of all.